Ramón Grosfoguel, it's a really big honor to be here with you in Caracas, Venezuela, to have this interview about your decolonial perspective of Venezuela. My first question for you is if there exists decolonial process in Venezuela.
Absolutely, there are decolonial processes that are very important. For example, the Bolivarian Revolution, and this was part of the thought of Chavez, something unknown elsewhere. If you're not in Venezuela, you don't get to know these things. And that is that the process, the Bolivarian Revolution, was not a static process. It was not an affirmation of the modern capitalist state. It was, the conception was, we need to occupy the state to interrupt the logic of neoliberalism and the logics of domination, of imperialism, but without having the illusion that things will be solved there. So what Hugo Chavez did was to put a parallel power structure that is called the commune. So you have commune organizations that are legal in Venezuela, and that people have empowered themselves with these commune organizations that put into question the modern European capitalist patriarchal state. Because in a sense, in Latin America, the state is an imitation of the states of Europe. If you remember, in the 19th century, the white Querol elites of Latin America, when they beat up the Portuguese and the Spaniards in the wars of independence, what they put forward was an imitation of the French Republic. A very bad imitation, because in fact you have here in Latin America structures of domination that are racist, that are patriarchal, that are capitalist. So the state is already a capitalist, patriarchal, racist, white supremacist state. The white Querol elites always dominated the structures of the state. Here comes a Bolivarian revolution led by Hugo Chavez, and they won democratically the elections over and over again. In 20 years, they have won 23 elections out of 25. So they have a very strong popular support, in great measure because you have a redistribution of wealth in Venezuela, something that does not exist in the neoliberal economies that you find in the rest of Latin America. Hugo Chavez came to power to interrupt those neoliberal logics, those capitalist logics, those structures of domination, both patriarchal, racist, and so on. So if you watch carefully the social base of the Bolivarian Revolution, they are fundamentally women of color, the great majority in the social base of the revolution, women of color. And if you have to be in Venezuela to really see this, because I know that many Europeans, even of the left, are very skeptical. I think because of a very, how can I say, Eurocentric view of the world, you know, so they lose sight of the particularity of things happening elsewhere, or they try to understand them from the lenses of the Eurocentric categories. And so they miss a lot in doing that, even from the left. So you have a Eurocentrism from the left that is terrible, because if you look at the world from that point of view, then you miss a lot of things that are happening here. And unless you come here and see it with your eyes and talk to the people, you will never know about it. Because the image that the media reproduce around the world, the imperialist media, is of an authoritarian government, of a dictator, you know, such as Chavez, later Maduro, of, in fact, nothing to do. They have won the elections with more levels of legitimacy than any other president in Europe today, or in USA or Latin America. You know, Maduro won the election May 20 of last year with 68% of the votes, you know, and with 1/3 of the people inscribed. If you look at for example, President Trump, he was elected with 46%, less than 50%, and he was elected with only 26% of the people able to vote. So it's way below the legitimacy of someone like Maduro. Now, why we have this propaganda? I think it has to do with the imperialist attempt at destroying a revolution that is radical, and because the USA knows that the largest oil fields and gold mines in the world are here in Venezuela. So they're trying to destroy this, like they did in Iraq, like they did in Libya, like they did in Syria. So they're just looking for the destruction of these countries to get possession of the oil. So the main thing is that in Venezuela you have a commune structures of decision making that are both in politics as well as in the economy. So, for example, part of the project is that in the long run, those commune forms of political participation of the masses, of the people, should be replacing the decision making of the state. I'm saying in the long run because they don't fall into the trap of anarchism, of thinking that you're going to get rid of the state tonight. They're thinking of that as a long-term project and learning from 20th century socialism. 20th century socialism was statist, state capitalist, and it was centralized, top-down, and they're calling for a socialism of the 21st century, you see? And that socialism of the 21st century is from a global south point of view. So they have looked at the attempts at socialism in the global north, at the problems of those models that fail, at the problems of authoritarianism in those models, no democracy, state capitalist structure where you end up having a kind of a state bourgeoisie. And one of the things that Hugo Chavez did was to conceive of a way that will, in a sense, not reproduce the problems of 20th century socialism in the global north that were very Eurocentric and very problematic, but they reproduce everything they're fighting against in being racist, in being Eurocentric, in being sexist, in being homophobic, in being ecologicida, because they reproduce also the technologies of Western modernity that are destructive of life, So in a sense, the project of Hugo Chavez is a project that tries to decolonize Venezuela from racist and forms of domination that go back to colonial times and that are still reproducing today, even though they're formally not a colonial country. And for example, they inherited Christendom patriarchy, they inherited racism, they inherited the Cartesian vision of the world. It's a cosmology that produces technology. If you produce technology with a Cartesian vision, that is a Eurocentric dualistic vision, you're going to have there the rationality of destruction of life, because you have separated ontologically human life from other forms of life that in the West you call it nature. So they're trying to decolonize the forms of technology, the rationalities behind the production of technology that is so pervasive. So they're trying to bring epistemic diversity. For example, one of the things that Chavez said is we need to learn from the Indian socialism of Latin America. That is, indigenous communities have forms of commune forms and forms of socialism that we can learn from, instead of importing from the global north a model of socialism. So it's a very interesting process of decolonizing from racism, decolonizing from Christendom, decolonizing from Christendom patriarchy, decolonizing from ecologicidal structures, decolonizing from the state structures, and bringing a more radical form of democracy, such as commune-like forms.